I'm super excited to dive into some of the nitty-gritty behind how protocols and all of these different decentralized systems are being built and how they work, and really like spotlighting incredible developers in the space. So I'm very excited to be doing that on the pod.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see a lot of podcasts about founders talking about sort of the high level vision. And I think if your job is to look into the eye of the terminal all day, you don't always make a lot of time for going out and talking about what you're building. And I'm really excited to give developers a platform to do that.
So this was a great episode, and hopefully you enjoyed as much as we enjoyed recording it.
Were there any projects that you built or just like design patterns that you got into, anything that developers could learn from how you got into the space? Like any anecdotes you want to explore?
So I guess the way that I actually started getting serious about development was when I got to my first conference. It was ETH Lisbon 2021 in October. And I met the Aave team in person. I hanged a lot around them. And I also met Miguel Piedrafita, the purple-haired developer. So we became really good friends, both Aave and me and Miguel. And so we started talking more, and he was already, like Miguel was already building a couple apps. He built this like repo building simple things with Solidity, like a simple version of ENS, a simple version of Uniswap, simple version of name your tool. And so that was like originally interesting to me. And I think I was exploring different places where I could go work to learn, right? Like entry-level junior blockchain engineer positions where I could learn more. And so I was exploring the space, and there was like a lot of things, right? Like there's people doing MEV stuff, there's people doing DeFi stuff, there's people doing NFT stuff, there's like different primitives you can try and do and pursue. Even scalability, at that time, I already had written an article on rollups from the research point of view when I was still doing like the research job. So I was getting into like, okay, I heard this thing like optimistic rollups and ZK rollups like late 2021. And then like cryptography started popping around more and more and more. And the next conference I went to, which was ETH Denver 2022 last year in February, I met a bunch of folks that I was hanging around with on Twitter and Discord from the Alongside team. And they're building like a crypto market index platform that allows you to aggregate like exposure to different tokens from different chains in one. And so I ended up joining them after ETH Denver because we met in person, we talked about all the different things they were doing. And since they were a startup and there were like a few cool people that I could learn from, I decided to join part-time. So I was doing like early exploration into like some cryptography stuff, like secure multi-party computation, threshold signatures, essentially a way for a network of computers to hold a shard of a private key, like a small piece of a private key. And if you have lots of these shards, if you have enough of them, you're able to generate a valid signature for the entire like private key. This is like the basics of threshold signatures. And so I was just doing like research into cryptography, and it got really interesting for me. So I was like, that's like my original like, okay, cryptography is cool. I'm probably gonna go more in this direction moving forward. And I was there for like 5-6 months, just doing some simple engineering and some research. Yeah.
Someone who's listening to this and is like, yeah, I do have a project in the back of my head that I kind of know I should build, but I'm like scared to do it, or I'm worried about having, people on crypto Twitter like destroy me or whatever. What piece of advice would you give them?
Use ChatGPT. I just try to get a little bit working. It's like seeing is believing. Just see if you can get the code to show up on the page. It's like the hello world. Can you get the contract? Can you get the first thing working? And then I feel like the process usually pulls you along. Yeah, I think different people are motivated differently by sharing. Like some people like are helped by like sharing their plans for accountability, and some people like get too much satisfaction from sharing their plans and they never actually do the things. So just ship it. Like if you have it and it's like half done, like that was the story of my contract that sold out. I was like I could wait like another week to fix all this stuff, or I could just like ship it today. And I probably would have never shipped it if I had waited another week. And so if you have something that's shippable, just ship it. And if you don't think it's shippable, it probably is actually.
What's one tool, pattern, library, something that you like that you think devs should check out, can learn from, would find interesting? It's shill time, basically.
I just always read other people's contracts to see how they do stuff. And so I'm always like, anytime I hit a problem, I'm always like, Uniswap did this, or how did Open do this, or just like knowing the paradigms of other people. I think that Solidity is like kind of like chess or something, in a way of like, it's important to like know the important pitches, like how the game is played and what are the openings.
I'm curious in terms of other starting points for people who are interested in exploring how they can leverage ZKPs in building applications. Like, what are the best places to start?
It's a good question. I am pretty sure there are a couple of awesome lists. If you want to get into zero knowledge in general, I had put out a blog post a couple of months ago when I started going to ZKP with what was my personal journey on how to get into the field. It's called a Beginner's Guide, Beginner's Guide to Zero Knowledge Proofs. It's on dev.to. But I would say that probably an easy way is to find a framework or a language that you feel comfortable with and join that community. Of course, I'm going to shill Noir's Discord and Discourse and our forum as well. You can jump in there, and we have several people who are working around the clock just on helping the community and getting developers on board and like answering every question out there, frequent office hours, and basically granting all the support needed, including the form of financial support. Like if you have something interesting that you want to build in Noir and want to apply for a grant, that's also an option. So for sure, I'm going to shield the Noir Discord for people to join who want to get into ZKP via learning Noir. We're also launching a course. I think that Pretty Cassidy is running it on zero knowledge using Noir. So that's also an option for getting into the space. And as usual, like probably one of the best ways is reading code out there. Like look for a project that you like, that uses zero knowledge, go through it until you understand what happens. I'm not sure if I'm legally allowed to say it out loud, but hey, Tornado Cash is great from an engineering perspective. It like ticks all the boxes on what you need to understand on what's a private transaction, what happens on a zero knowledge circuit, what's to verify the, in each place. And the paper is 2 pages long, and it walks you through everything you need. There's also this team, I think it's called Match 34. Sorry if I got the number wrong, that they do this project called Battle Zips, which is basically the game using zero knowledge proofs implemented in different languages. You can even play on the browser. And the idea is that the whole game is implemented using zero knowledge circuits. So whenever you as a player want to shoot the other player answers with a zero knowledge proof saying, hey, did you hit one of my boats or you didn't?
And so I'm curious more broadly how you think about designing like modular systems. I don't know if you would characterize party protocols as modular in that sense, but I'm curious your approach there.
Yeah, so we kind of have we have some layers of abstraction, like with different characteristics in terms of like their upgradability. So we have like the core kind of like party contract, which controls like the voting on different proposals, like the execution of proposals. But we also have this concept of a proposal execution engine, which is what actually like defines what the different proposals are and how they act. So when you create a party, you have this like immutable party contract that you have created, but then you can choose to opt into different proposal execution engines if you so choose to. So if you want to use if we introduce a new proposal type that you would like to use, then the party can vote on to upgrade to the newest version of the proposal execution engine, which would give you access to that new proposal type. But you are not automatically opted in to do that. That actually is something that has to pass governance. So we have kind of like the core functionality related to like voting, like interacting with the proposal execution engine, delegation, et cetera, and this core immutable party contract. And then we have the proposal execution engine, which people can choose to opt in to like the canonical latest version through actually passing a proposal. So that has like some really unique benefits, but it also has some challenges as well. Thinking about this holistically from like an engineering perspective, it means that the front end team is responsible for basically supporting all versions of these different proposal execution engines, like basically in some format forever. So in some ways, this really rubs on like a challenge in how Web 2 is really different than Web 3 from an engineering perspective, right? For Web 2, it feels like you can just easily push out new code to literally everybody. You can roll it back if it doesn't work. You can move really quickly there. But in the Web 3 world, if you take like the kind of like guarantees for the user seriously with regards to trying to have some sort of like long-term guarantees about what's going to change and how does it change, instead of just like upgrading everybody through proxy contracts all the time, you get into this world where you might have parties that are on different versions of proposal execution engines and that have different APIs that you in good faith want to support for the longevity of however long that party is around in some format. So that really is like a challenge and somewhat of a burden you take on as a full stack engineering team to support all of these old versions of contracts that might move somewhat quickly. And we could have taken an easier approach where it's like the DAO has control to upgrade everybody at any time and everybody's always on the same latest version. But we kind of took the like decentralized, like self-sovereignty, like ethos pretty seriously, and that we thought we really expect and want people to have strong guarantees about what it means to create a party and what kind of like control that you are guaranteed to have like forever using that party. So we have kind of like very explicit lines between what's upgradable, what's not, and how does the upgrade happen to have people have more confidence that their like contracts in their group wallet will like exist for like a long period of time, like under the like constraints that they're signing up for when they create the party.
As a lawyer, you go through a ton of training on the existing legal system and how to navigate it and what agreements look like and like all these different things. Solidity engineers also go through the ringer, but in a different way and much less structured. So I'm curious, when you think about like that transition from doing being a lawyer to being an engineer and considering this idea of like, you know, the chain as the like legal enforcement sort of system. I'm curious what design principles you're pulling from your past into engineering.
Right. So I think a nice concept that a lot of lawyers learn in law school is the bundle of sticks analogy for property rights. So seeing property as a set of things, a collection of rights, and not necessarily just one thing. So a good example is, you know, farmland. There's title, the deed to the actual like land itself. There can also be other rights that are given, such as like an easement. You're allowed to cross the farm, you know, during these hours with your cows. And then I think kind of from that perspective, looking at code and kind of what people are trying to do with like tokens that have like extensions and other, you know, similar extra rights is, you know, it's just an application of that idea. You know, the bundle of sticks in a smart contract is, you know, maybe the admin right, you know, the mint permissions, depositor role, the owner of the contract even, who can upgrade and reestablish balances and other sort of very interesting things. So I think kind of, the more into the name of the show, like the abstraction, like all this is you're just trying to record you know, property rights and then also set conditions for the transfer of those rights. And then kind of at that abstract level, which I think law school actually does a better job than the day-to-day grind of lawyering, is like teaching you how to think about like what the law and the legal system is actually trying to accomplish, for legal users who just want guarantees, so they can like project and build a business and like have long-term relationships. Once you have that sort of abstract idea, once you just see solidity or like a new sort of way to do that, you just like adopt it because you're a service provider for finality in a lot of ways. So if you see that, abstraction as like lawyers are, service finality, because the name of the game in a lot of cases is that the legal system provides that. Once there's a new game in town, such as like smart contracts and blockchain settlement, and kind of what you're saying, Chase, that like the nodes, the validators, the consensus mechanism is the, judiciary, or it's like the way people are recording changes in property rights. Once you see the new game in town, it's like you do have to adopt that, or you're just priced out or excluded through sort of specialty from participating in that practices. So, I think kind of like why I think what I do is interesting at this juncture is there's still not a perfect hybrid of these two systems, and because of that incongruity, there's like risks associated with pulling and using the jurisdiction of Ethereum or the smart contracts, if you will. That are not entirely contained with that code. So kind of actually understanding the full bundle of sticks on and off chain, presumptions of liability that, regardless of what you think about your, digital jurisdiction or your digital organization, what is the public thing? Other people who have ways to sort of use an attack vector through law, how do you anticipate what they're going to try to do? And then how can you assemble the property rights to your clients in the best way possible? The best way possible, for a lot of clients, and I would argue is like, moving to crypto, at least for, certain aspects of finance, like stablecoin settlement, is way better than sending wires. So I think we'll see sort of lawyers at least get sophisticated about the USDC, as cash consideration, for a safe round or something like that. This, adoption, I think is not only because it's like trendy, but I think, these lawyers will actually have to internalize, if they're good lawyers, the benefits of using sort of these technologies to do the deals a little bit faster or, service more international clients. So, yeah, it is kind of like I was saying before. If you abstract the role into finality service provider, then you have to kind of use new tools that compete with that. The legal system isn't the only way to service that as well.
This call out around like moving away from kind of like the you get one shot to get it right towards more upgradability patterns and like versioning is really interesting. What do you think changed over the last few years that that caused that shift?
That's a good question. My first reaction is that it is like Web 2, for lack of a better term, Web 2 devs are used to iterating in development, right? You ship updates to traditional applications daily, weekly, right? We don't push to prod on Fridays, but we push to prod on Monday or whatever. Like you just iterate more quickly. There's always features to add. You take user feedback, you integrate it into your web app, and you ship a little update. So that paradigm, I think people are comfortable with it. It also makes sense, right? Like software is hard to get right. If you don't spend a million years like architecting a thing, thinking through every edge case, really planning how the thing is going to work, like you're going to want to change it. And that's still true. Like there's always things about systems that get deployed that you probably want to change. And so I think in some way people are just being a bit more realistic about that. Like it is really hard to sink, 4 years of development time to make something. Does it have its pros? I honestly do think yes, but it's like much less accessible. It's much more expensive, et cetera, et cetera. I do think people thought about smart contracts differently than they do now as well. I think there was like a lot less forking going on. There was a lot less, we can just add an opcode in this fork. Like we can just, change the address of the contract. Like there was some idea that you were working on like durable, long-lasting, forever public goods versus now I don't know if people think about it the same way. I think in some ways they do. In some ways some projects are like less ambitious than that, which is like maybe reasonable, but like I don't know, like Maker's vision was to create like literally like a new global reserve currency, right? I don't know if I'm supposed to say that on the internet, but like, that's what they're trying to do, and like replace a global financial system. And it's a really bold thing to attempt. But to do that, you have to do all these things that they did, which is like make it safe, make it robust, make it, enduring. And that's probably part of it as well. I don't know. I think now I'm just in like speculation territory, but I do think like people being used to like faster development cycles and then just like, I don't know, different ideas of what we should make.
It's definitely, yeah, I think we've seen that pendulum swing. When Web3 was new, there was this new way of creating entirely immutable applications. And we got a lot of things like Maker that came out of that. And then a lot of, like you said, a lot of Web 2 engineers came into the space, kind of continued the existing paradigm that they were used to. And I think there's sort of this middle ground that we talked a little bit with Steve Klebanoff from PartyDAO yesterday about this pattern of these immutable contracts that you can opt into an upgrade. You see with things like Uniswap where there's, V1, V2, V3. And each one of those can't be upgraded until people decide to go ahead and use the next one. So I think, yeah, there's definitely this this spectrum, I would say, in the space, and it'll be interesting to see how different types of applications land into different niches. Your goal is to be sort of like unopinionated and more so just like an aggregate of established standards. You don't want to be the gatekeeper. How do you think about upgradability in that sense? Because I know every single dev that you talk to is going to have a different opinion on upgradability. How does OpenZeppelin remain sort of like objective and offer both options within the library?
I mean, at the implementation level, there are even two versions of the context library. One of them upgradable, the other not upgradable. So users can pick from whatever they want. Still, OpenZeppelin puts a lot of effort into tools for securely managing upgradability. Personally, it was also shared by more people in the company. I think that upgradability is a super valuable tool. But as any tool, it comes with its pros and cons. And you cannot just drop upgradability on top of a project. You need to have a concrete plan for it. You need to have a proper governance process. Like, you open up a whole kind of worms when you introduce upgradability, that's for sure. But for most projects, it's super valuable.
From the perspective of just account abstraction adoption, part of it is just like waiting for standards. Do you think that's the main thing that's holding this all back?
I think it's that. I think it's also like the wallet, or however we want to call like the end user interface to it. Like, it's going to be hard. The proposed like whatever 4337, I always get these numbers confused. But 4337 spec, which is like you get a new mempool, you can upgrade any EOA to an account, a smart contract account. Like, it all like sounds reasonable, but I think if you like look at like how user patterns have gone, like it's really hard to get people to like upgrade their behavior unless they have like a really good reason to. And I'm probably, would I make this bet? I think we probably haven't done a good enough job of like selling people on the benefits. Like, are we going to get these people to upgrade? They don't already, like, my other thing is like Ethereum specifically. I mean, account abstraction is not a new concept. It exists in other ecosystems besides Ethereum. It exists in in tech in general. Like, these things it's just like a way of dealing with things, just like an abstract layer above what you were doing before. Like, I don't know, it's kind of a silly name in some way. But anyways, I think that the Gnosis Safe is arguably Ethereum's account abstraction, and it's not everyone is using that for good reason. It's more expensive, whatever, but you're still going to incur these costs to get people to upgrade to this new infra. So, and it will depend on the tooling around it. Like, if there's not a one-click way, I think there's a new one that like clients put out. Like, this one, I have to look at the number, but I did write it down because I thought it might come up. 7377. I think it's relatively new. but it's just like a way for like one-click migration. I'll just show that really quick. I think people should go read it and give feedback on it because I think it will be helpful. But yeah, like there's this assumption that we've made that like people will understand the benefits of this thing and thus upgrade their systems. And like, I don't know, I think there's a lot less just like for wallets, there's a lot less reasons why they might do it. Like you're going to incur a ton of development costs. I think it's possible if someone does it really well, you would see like an upseating of like some, what do you call it? Like untrenching of the whatever, like usurping of existing big players. Like I think there's a chance there for this, but I'm not like fully convinced it'll happen. But there is that opportunity because we do have to like kind of rethink how we do accounts and like what people. I think Intense is actually going to be like a bigger shakeup if this meme takes off at a user level, or if there's like actual infrastructure to support it. Like something that I think is cool that doesn't exist, I think we will see, is just like prompt. Like everyone's saying like, you know, prompt engineering for transactions, but like there is this like idea that you can just like ask more generally like for things, Ethereum transactions aside, like that is an interface that I do think people are more comfortable with and like want to use. Like I think one of the reasons that like ChatGPT or whatever has been popular is because you can just kind of play with the idea of like, oh, I could get what I want. I can see if I can get what I want through this. And I do think seeing at least even just how I've tried to use it, I'm like, I want to make this thing work for me in this way. And I would love to see interfaces like for this type of stuff that work in a similar way of like, I don't know exactly what I want, but I have some rough idea. How close can I get? And that's layered on top of all these like low level, like whatever intense account abstraction things, right?
Yeah. I think it would be interesting to dive deeper into some of the like technical aspects of account abstraction. But before we do that, everyone seems to have a different definition of what intents actually are. And so I'm curious how you would define intents.
Okay, I have a it's not my definition, but Christopher from Monoma has it, and I think his is the best one that I've seen so far. And I want to pull it up because I don't want to misquote this. But I probably am going to struggle to find it. Ugh, okay. I'm going to try because I can't find it right away. I think I took a picture of it, but he was basically saying just like, okay, what are intents? Intents are basically, I don't know, it's like, the thing that stuck out to me though was like he made explicitly clear that they're over a specific domain. And so I think that's like really important in intents is to remember that they're over a specific domain. I think eventually we'll see the specific domain kind of expand to be like any type of multi-chain EVM, non-EVM thing. But it's just like, to me, an intent is just an abstraction above a transaction. So it's just like, I want to do X. That's all it is. It says nothing about its implementation. It says nothing about how this actually gets facilitated. It says nothing about the system that it works in. But it's just like a desire expressed over a domain, I think, is kind of like a way to say it. But I think everyone does have different ones for different reasons. It's lossy enough that you can fit a lot inside of it, which is hard, but I don't think the wrong thing, if that is fair to say.
Yeah, I think that was a pretty solid definition. I like that. I think account abstraction has taken a while. It's been talked about since like basically the very beginning of Ethereum. And so I think one of the reasons why that's the case is this sort of chicken and egg problem where we need to see examples of this to know what sort of standards we should establish. But at the same time, like not many people want to build those specific implementations until we see more standards. So what do you think? Like we're slowly moving in the direction of figuring out all these details. What are those details that you're excited about? And you mentioned 7377 as like one example that you wanted to get people to give some feedback on. What's the interesting pieces that you see within account abstraction?
I think so. The one that's been tried before, I guess, is like the meta transaction relay networks. And I do think, as far as I like understand, I think one thing is like, I don't know how many people, and I would count myself in this included, like, do I really understand the 4337 spec? Like, no, probably not. Like, does any, like, I don't know. I feel like it's almost like it's the same thing with like intents or whatever. Like, the definition of what we actually mean when we say the thing is like actually hard to pin down. I think that's a byproduct of kind of working on user experience of distributed systems. So that's like a fun challenge, right? That's our coordination problems all the way down vibe. But I do think this one, as I understand it, it like kind of proposes this user operations mempool so that we all like, and how that like is actually going to work. Like for MEV, like transactions with value, I think it still will work, right? Like people will still do MEV on that, which means people will still be incentivized to like run infrastructure for these networks. I think somewhere where we might see this be more difficult is things like, I don't know, like for when I was working on Lens, like a social network, like there's not a ton of like incentive for anyone in a gasless way to submit transactions. So how do meta transactions work for non-financial transactions is almost even the wrong word when you talk about like social, but that's what they are like at the technical level. But like they're just, they're user operations, which actually is what I think the thing is called in the spec, which is good. But the incentive to publish them and to like validate them is like much, much less plumbed through. So that's like something that I don't know if I'm excited about it, but excited to see if we can figure it out. And then, yeah, I don't know. I do think it's like going to be a wallet game though. Like this stuff, what we're talking about, wallets, connections with RPCs, connections with new mempools. There's a lot of this infrastructure that does exist already. It will be kind of up to some of them to push, I think something that is funny, and I guess like one of my final boss in crypto, I guess if I can solve this one thing, I'll be able to leave, is that when I was working at MetaMask, the one of the first things I did there was make a branch of MetaMask that has a Gnosis safe inside of it. We never shipped it. And one of the reasons we didn't is because I made it as a 1 of 1. So it supported like 1 of 1 M of N multisig, but just 1 of 1. And at the time we were like, oh, but like people want to use like, 2 of 4 or 3 of 5. And now, actually, 1 of 1, most popular configuration of a Gnosis safe, could not have known that at the time. I didn't think that that's how it'd be. But now, like that type of thing, I think makes more sense. People were sold on that. People wanted a way to recover their own keys, and we're not getting it at the protocol level. That's like an important distinction, I think, between Ethereum and like some, like Polkadot, for example, has like many different types of accounts, like in the runtime, already has existed for a while. You can vote with like a specific key. You can do meta transactions. Like there's a lot more infrastructure around this in like other ecosystems. But for Ethereum, I think Vitalik talked about it at ECC. They just were like, we need to ship this thing. And that's super valid. But it has come back to, I think, bite us a little in this way.
On the note around like gas optimization, I'm curious when you think about, doing a ton of things in a single contract and trying to really optimize for gas efficiency, it feels like there are some trade-offs in terms of just like readability, how easily people can build on it and how flexible it is, like after the fact. And so I'm curious how you think about the trade-offs there around gas optimization and also, making these things usable and easy to deploy and use.
That's a very fair point. So you can go too far into one direction, of course. You can overcorrect. And I think there is a trend in gas optimization to write so much logic in low-level assembly or YOL that you can miss and might scare off a lot of people, I would say, that are reading that like their scan and realize they can't read a single line of it. So I think that's going too far in terms of gas optimization. The latest versions of Solidity, I think, are more generous. And you can do a lot of neat, sort of layer one single contracts that, still, I think, are fairly readable with, maybe putting a little bit of assembly onto something like, loops or, signature recovery. But I would say, yeah, overall, it is a balance, and it is, I think, probably way more of a priority if you're a new project to sort of have very readable and user-friendly contracts. But all that being said, a point I try to make, often is that money is obviously the most important factor for a lot of people using this, because they might be coming from a speculative perspective or just from a cost-saving perspective, that if they're going to use this, they want to make sure that they're not spending a lot more than they're getting out. So I think, for people that are of interest, can read the code, it isn't so much of an ask that, certain portions are gas optimized, or that we're not using a series of contracts. I actually think, using the time lock and several different addresses in conjunction introduces more complexity and risk. So I think, I would argue that like a simple single contract, like a voting ERC20 plus a way to tally and send votes, is probably the most user-friendly way to deploy sort of that version of a DAO. And that was also something that, I wanted to do, the keep contract, which has, I've sort of like hinted here, is an 1155 voting token contract, but it also has a multi-sig as its like sort of core governance. What I wanted to do there, when I was studying, Gnosis Safe, the seed-zero multi-sig pattern, and several attempts at that, what I really wanted to do was, collapse as much as I could, into the single contract. So if you had DAOs grew out of the multi-sig, it wasn't so much of an ask or so much of complexity between how do the DAO tokens interact with like sort of the main vault, the main brand. But I also wanted to simplify the execute API and other things that I think Gnosis Safe has anticipated maybe too much development around like safe transaction gas and these other sort of maybe more developer friendly but more complex parameters. I wanted a very simple, at least for my sake, readable version of a multi-sig contract that also had a way to have ownership through tokens. So that is the design challenge, but I think kind of doing it in a single contract allows people to like really simplify their auditing tasks. Because when I have to look at some of these governor contracts, even these are battle tested, I still have to do a little bit of a pub crawl across the Etherscan to find all the contracts and like read them, check their ownership, make sure they all relate in a way that makes sense. So yeah, I think that increases the burden and the reliance on sort of UIs that might misreport information. And I think keeping it as simple at the contract level makes it a lot easier, to get started with these things.
It sounds like there's this like auto balancing mechanism that you borrowed from previous projects, and you applied that to the like NFT loan ecosystem. And this, I mean, overall, like, what would you say that you took away from building this, and like, what did you learn? What were some of the aha moments that you got as you built this out?
We released the white paper, and that was sort of satisfying. We got like a good response from people. I think people were intrigued with the model. And yeah, that was exciting. We launched Paper Meme, and the main goal was to like make it way less friction to get a loan. You shouldn't have to like come and see what lenders want and like this whole peer-to-peer thing, and then it's like a 30-day loan and you come back 30 days and it had no expiry. You could do like instant loans, it could do long tail assets. And so it sort of checked a lot of the boxes that we wanted to check, but it still was the case that, I mean, it's always difficult. I don't think that Paper Meme succeeded, and it's always difficult to learn a lesson from failure, because failure is sort of like the highest entropy state. It's very low signal. And so it's tempting to learn the wrong lesson. So there's market timing things, like a lot of people were like, hey, this is like sick, but I don't want to loan against my NFTs. There were, towards the end, liquidity things. Blur launched their own marketplace and was sort of like doing liquidity rewards for people doing it. And so it's like, is there actually demand for this, or are people just like getting paid to take loans? And to me, that wasn't really that motivating to compete with. Like, I didn't really just want to like do liquidity mining, and like, I didn't want to make it succeed at all costs. And yeah, there was all these questions of like, well, you could, you could change the parameters, you could do it with blue chip, you could do like, there was a bunch of different ways to spin it. But towards the end, we weren't really able to move the needle on adoption. We were like, oh, maybe adding all these collections will move the needle. Didn't really move the needle. Oh, like people want a simpler interface. Is that going to move the needle? Didn't really move the needle. And so we were sort of looking forward. We actually had like plenty of money left, plenty of months left to keep experimenting. But it was sort of like decreasing confidence that the world is actually responding to our hypotheses. Like so far, the hypotheses we've had of like, if we change this, this will lead to more adoption, wasn't really panning out. And I wasn't really willing to say like, this must succeed at all costs. And we're going to do like liquidity mining and all this sort of stuff. So it was this mix of like it was actually miraculous to me that, again, the microeconomics worked. Like it sort of traded in a very reasonable range. It traded like where it should. Like people were responsive to these signals. And so that was cool. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I think like a lot of, people who are interested in like protocol design and stuff were into it. And like we had a lot of interesting conversations. It was built on Uniswap. So like that was a whole interesting thing about it. So yeah, those things were satisfying, but I think, yeah, it was very tough to crack user adoption to the degree that we needed to.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This was wonderful.